Hey, folks, a massive welcome. And today we've got what I would class as an absolute legend in the pipe band drumming world. We're very fortunate to have Johnny Rowe join us. So I'm going to give you a wee bit of background on Johnny. So you will all know him as being a world champion drummer, a world champion bass drummer, but also he's a snare drummer, a very damn good snare drummer. In fact, if you go over to Ontario, where he's from, he has won in Canada grade 4 right up to grade 1 in solo snare drumming. So it says a lot that some of the world's best bass and tenor players also play snare drum at a very high level. And also it's important for me to note that he's actually a certified bass and tenor judge with the PPBSO. That's always a mouthful for me to say, PPBSO. So I'm glad I got it right there. So Johnny, a massive welcome. It's great to see you.
Yeah, man, it's awesome to be here. Sorry for the mic again, just a little thing to point out because I don't want anyone to get angry at me, but all of my snare drumming accolades were all from back out east, so the Atlantic Canadian Pipe Band Association before I moved to Ontario.
Cool.
But yeah, come from more of a snare drumming background for sure. Yeah.
Well, I know that part of Canada where you're from, and I know some incredible drummers that have came from that neck of the woods. So I know that the standard is incredibly high. So it speaks volumes about your percussive background.
I was fortunate to have some really good teachers early on, which was great. And it helped me advance, very quickly, which was, awesome. Yeah.
Good. Well, we all have seen you. Like, I'm sure everyone that's watching this, if you haven't seen Johnny play, please go and my highlights are some of the times when he played with the 78th Fraser Highlanders. And in my opinion, he was like the cornerstone of that band. He was the heartbeat. He was the one that, for me, just brought the whole thing to life. So if you haven't seen him play, please go back. I'll pop a few links down. Hit subscribe below, but I'll pop a few links below of some of his best performances. So let's talk about where you began. You talked about some of your good tuition and role models. So where did the drumming journey begin for you?
Good question. I mean, basically, I guess I'm one of those guys that from my earliest recollection, I just always wanted, something drew me to banging on the pots and pans, at home. I tried all kinds of instruments when I was younger, but something about the drums, I just wanted to be a drummer. And of course, as a lot of Canadian kids growing up in the early 80s, I wanted to be Neil Peart, and listening to Rush records, and I wanted to be a rock star playing a big drum kit. And so it was a lot of hounding my parents to want to eventually take drums. And kind of by accident more than by design, I ended up joining a local pipe band. My old man heard an advert on morning radio one day, before school, or I was having my oatmeal with my dad, and he kind of said, "Why don't you try something like that?" And I was kind of like, yeah, okay, I guess if it gets me the drum set a little bit faster. And I guess the rest is history, as they say. So later that week, we marched off down to the local church hall where the Dartmouth Boys Pipe and Drum Band were recruiting their new players for, I think, $50 for the whole year of lessons or whatever. And, do you want to play chanter or do you want to play drums? And it was kind of like, drums. Sure you don't want the chanter, drums. So there it is. And I started taking lessons, and about a year later, I got my first drum kit. And as they say, the rest is history. I'm still doing both. So yeah.
It's amazing. And what led you to start becoming a competitive drummer? So you started off on this learning trajectory, but what took you to the point where you thought, hey, I actually want to be competitive with this?
I think at that time, it was kind of just something you kind of just did. Like you just kind of followed the herd, Again, for me, it was always, I was just absolutely enthralled with anything percussive, especially if it was drums. But I can remember in those early days, I would get my 1 hour lesson, for example, from my teacher. And then when we were done, excuse me, the senior band, or the grade 2 band, which was Dartmouth and District, my instructor would go and they would have their practice immediately following when they would teach the kids. And I would constantly it was never like I wanted to go home. I would always have to, ask my parents if I could stay later to watch the senior band practice and, march up and down the hall and counter march and, play their 6/8s and 3/4s and contest material in the gymnasium. And it was just something I was just always like, I couldn't get enough of it. And so when it got to that point where I was good enough to actually, get kitted out and play in the band, which is, I'm going to say maybe 2 years after I started lessons, it was like, okay, you're ready to fly now out of the nest, and here you go, here's your kit and here's your drum, and away we go. And every weekend there's going to be contests. And
Oh, good.
I was fortunate enough to have parents that were super stoked to just like drive me around to all of these contests all over the place. And I didn't realize it until I got older, but you realize the sacrifices that having people like that in your life, family members like that in your life, that they're quite literally changing their life to help facilitate your hobby, which really ends up becoming a lifestyle, so it was one of those things. It like back in those days, there was no grade 5 bands. There was no there was nothing like that in my area. It was just you joined and you took lessons and then you played in the grade 4 band. That was it. And it was just something you did. Like, you were kind of just expected to go compete. The whole concept of like parade bands is something that has, generally speaking, has been kind of a new concept to me. When I was growing up, there was no, you'd see the old guys in like the Legion bands and stuff like that, but I never really thought of that as like parade bands. They're just, old veterans or whatever who have been there, done that, and they're still kind of blowing the pipes and banging the drums. But in my day, when you started and you went and you competed. That was it. So here we are.
Yeah. For people who are watching this, whether they're young learners or whether they're adult learners, the thing I take out of that is that, this is not an instant gratification thing. Pipe band drumming or bagpiping or whatever we want to look at as part of it, it's delayed gratification. And my reflections on my learning are very similar in that it probably took me 2.5 years before I got a drum and got into the band. Mm-hmm. But I think there's an expectation nowadays that there's got to be a shortcut. There's got to be an app I can download that can make me a great drummer. But what I'm hearing from you is actually there is no shortcuts.
I wish it was that easy. I wish I could, I wish I could just, when it comes to my kit playing, let me tell you, like, I can play a lot of stuff, and I like to think I'm a pretty damn good kit drummer. I've played on a few records, and I've done some touring, and I've done a few studio sessions here and there. And I know what I'm doing, but, I wish I could just click on a video and make my left foot do what some of these, thrash metal guys are doing. The fact of the matter is you got to put the hours in the chair, and it ain't going to happen unless you do the work. And the same goes, I think, for anything kind of worthwhile, in life. Like, there's no immediate, you don't just open up a box and pull out the prize and there it is. I'm good to go. You got to do the time. And this is where I think a lot of people kind of fall to the wayside because they want that instant gratification, and maybe some of it has to do with just the kind of, I sound like an old geezer when I say this, but the kind of the insta banking, the fast, the fast food kind of mentality that we're in now. We want everything immediately. We want it now. We want instant gratification, and it doesn't always work that way, especially in the arts. You have to really, really put that, what is it, the 10,000 hours in or whatever. I have no idea if I've come anything close to that when it comes to my drumming, whether it be pipe band or otherwise, but I know I've put a ton of hours in, and you got to do that. You have to do that. You got to immerse yourself in it as much as you can if you care about it. If you don't have the interest, then that's also cool. You move on to something else maybe eventually, but instant gratification doesn't happen. You got to work your butt off for it, and
that's a great message, because when people watch you perform and they get wowed, it's like, hey, I'd like to learn that. Could you show me a few things? But actually, it's not about that. It's about really immersing yourself in the whole art. So if you were to think about your experience as a snare drummer, how does that complement? So there'll be a lot of bass drummers watching this. I know that for sure.
Mm.
So if you want to be a great bass drummer, how does that snare drum foundation really support you to be a great bass drummer?
I've always been very vocal about, mentioning that it's absolutely key. Full disclosure, I'm terrible at theory. I say that to anyone that I've taught any of my clinics, anyone who asks me for advice or whatever. I wish I would have, taken the time to get that hammered into me a little bit more, but I have a great ear and I have a big heart, and I know, I've always just kind of been one of those guys. Same with my drum kit playing. It's one of those things where it's like I can write out my own, charts that make sense to me when I'm doing a recording session. Some other bloke is going to read it and they're going to be like, what the hell is this? I don't, what are these? What do you mean by this notation here? What do you mean by this little footnote? But that's okay. I'm not saying it's okay to not have good theory. Definitely get good theory if you can spend the time. But if you have a way of hearing things and can put things in context and develop your meter and develop your feel and develop your basic language, which is what you get with the snare drumming. It's like, the essential rudiments. That's like our ABCs. And you need to be able to communicate that. And as a bass drummer or as a tenor drummer, if you have that background, I did an interview when I was playing with Dowco when we were at the UK Championships in 2018 with Big Rab, and he was asking me like a similar question, and I just said, you don't have to be Jim Kilpatrick, you don't have to be Stephen Creighton, you don't have to be a top soloist, you don't have to be one of the flank guys for Inverary or whatever. You just have to be able to have a knowledge of knowing what's going on in that back line as a bass and tenor player, and maybe be able to play certain things so you can pick things out of the air so you know how to work around them or how to help embellish what they're doing. And I strongly, strongly suggest to people to at least take some basic snare drumming lessons so they know what a Rademachew is, so they know what a Swiss rough is versus an open rough versus a double stroke roll versus a crushed roll versus the list goes on. Your basic rudiments, and be able to at least perform on a basic level some of that stuff, because you can also take some of those things to the big drum or to the tenor section. And if you can do that, that's when you have the ability to come up with stuff that isn't quite so necessarily, it checks all the boxes and whatnot, but it also is a little bit vanilla and a little bit bread and butter, and it gives you more of an ability to do some really truly cool things in those 2 or 3, maybe 4 chances you get in a performance medley, for example, to do some really cool stuff that is going to potentially make a judge really perk up the ears and listen.
I love it. Well, that's like some golden
Yeah.
nuggets for you bass drummers and tenor drummers in there. Some things to really take out of that. And a question actually I was thinking about, because you have played at the very pinnacle of the pipe band world. You've won the World Drum Corps Championships. You've won world's best bass. Like, those are the things that everybody wants a piece of, right?
Mm-hmm.
So your role in the band, when I was leading drummer of my band, I always looked at, there was 3 key leaders that worked together: pipe major, bass drummer, leading drummer. And there's other leaders within that, but those were the 3. So do you have any advice for leading drummers, whether they're grade 1 or grade 5 or anywhere in between? Any advice for leading drummers, how they can actually fully support and empower the midsection? What kind of communication, what kind of support, what kind of autonomy, what would you recommend to a leading drummer to be like, hey, this is what we need from you to be the very best and contribute the best we can?
That working relationship is key for sure. Definitely those 3 people are absolutely, integral, and you got to be able to work well together and have a good communication, not only within the band, but, away from band too. And just, again, having a friendly enough vibe with each other, that you can just sit down and just banter and just, talk about the non-band stuff as much as the band stuff. I think, there's a lot of bands that I mean, I can only speak from my experiences, but I'd venture to guess that there are probably some bands that have a little bit more of a kind of, a little bit more of a strict kind of hierarchy when it comes to those leadership positions. And I think that there are some bands, some very good bands, that probably have a leading drummer, for example, that maybe like writes everything, writes snare scores, writes the bass, writes the tenor, and you know what, that's fine, like if that works. But I've always been lucky that I've been in situations working with people, both lead drummers and pipe majors and other key supporting people, that they've always been very encouraging for the bass and tenor section to bring ideas forth and to come up with cool ideas. Now, they may not always work out, but at least there's that freedom to open a dialogue and to experiment. And I can remember certainly in some of those, earlier years when I was playing in the Frasers, Bill was always really good with, he may not necessarily have been able to communicate the language, again, kind of like, Bill's a keyboard guy. So he'd be like, you know what, Johnny, I want like this, like, I hear a horn section here or something like that. He'd be like, and it's like, I'd be like, okay. And I can remember, at the time, for example, like, me and Lauren Bonnet, who was the lead tenor at the time, and Drew Duthart, we'd be like, what the hell is he talking about? But we'd have a little, we'd have a little confab together, and we'd talk about things. And again, there's that dialogue, so that amidst maybe the broken discussion, together you can figure it out. And I was always lucky to have people around me like that who if I had a cool idea to bring to the table, like they'd entertain it. And again, like I said, it doesn't always work out, but if you can speak the language or whatever, and whatnot, you can come up with some really truly cool things. And like the Dizzle medley, it's a perfect example.
Yeah.
Right? Like we came up with that idea, I think literally, as I remember, I might be a little bit foggy, but we were basically just hanging out one day around a kitchen table and talking about, this would have been in the fairly early stages when we were like writing scores, or Drew was writing scores or whatever. And it essentially, without going into the crazy long-winded story, it essentially germinated, the seed was planted from my idea of like a Led Zeppelin song, the immigrant song, ba-dum, ba-da-da-dum, ba-dum, ba-da-da-dum, ba-dum, ba-da-da-dum. And somehow that ended up as, Hammer of the Gods ended up as that rhythmic thing that we ended up with the Dizzle,
so cool.
Which worked out pretty good for us that year,
Very
so
good.
yeah.
And actually, I might pop that performance down below, a YouTube video of that down below,
Yeah.
for people to check out. So before you hit subscribe, guys, go and check that video out as well. That's awesome. And let's talk about that while you're on that. So what is one career highlight for you? If you thought back, that was a moment I'd never want to forget, that was epic. What is one moment?
Oh man, it's hard to just kind of pick one. I mean, there's a few obvious standouts. Some of them might be some of the biggest standout moments for me might not necessarily be what people would normally think. Like obviously, winning the Sash in 2007 was incredible, right? Like I finished top, fourth place as a band that year. It's the highest I've ever finished. And that was crazy. That was a crazy thrill. And I just remember like, I mean, like the roar of, you're in center bands, and like the roar of everyone screaming was like, James, man, it was absolutely deafening. Like, I mean, you've won some prizes too. I know you know what I'm talking about. And it's like, it was just like, it was like deafening. It was deafening. It was just so surreal. And then, you know, when they announced the best bass prize after that, it was just like, oh my God, like what is going on right now? And it was just, you know, I'll never forget what the grass felt like walking up to get that trophy. And, you know, obviously that's a huge highlight. But, you know, there's some other really, really cool ones too. I mean, when I first got the phone call to join the Frasers, after I played with Halifax, you know, I'd taken a couple years off to kind of concentrate more on like the rock band thing. And when I got a call from John Walsh, so like there are some heavyweight names for you. John's a great guy, good friend of mine. But when you get a call from John Walsh, and then a couple of days later from Bill Livingston, you know, these guys are legends, and like basically asking you to be in their band, it's like, yeah, you know, that's a cool moment for me for sure. And, you know, there's a bunch of others, like when I finished my tenure with the Frasers, and when David Hilder called me to come out and play with Triumph Street, with Dowco, it was like, you know, that was huge as well. And, you know, can't say enough good stuff about that organization. It's such a shame that the band, you know, kind of, you know, went belly up, but we still keep in a lot of contact. And that was a huge thrill for me too, you know, kind of joining that whole West Coast thing. I wish I could have, you know, in some respects, I wish I could have done it earlier. But that was awesome. And I had one really great year with those guys, and you know, getting a chance to also play under Gary Corkin, like another legendary guy, and all the people that I've met, like some of the great friends that I've met from that organization, you know, Lee Lawson, Robert Holland, all these people, you know, who've played with RUC and, you know, stuff. And it's just like, that's a pretty cool thrill as well.
So you're sitting there in Ontario, I'm here in New Zealand, but when you mention those names, it's probably, for people watching, it's probably just reinforcing this is more, it's more than competition, right? And so when you say Robert Holland, so Robert's a great friend of mine from Northern Ireland, and was a role model for me as a youngster.
Yeah.
Amazing guy. And Lee Lawson, he's a very funny guy, cheeky as hell. He'll be watching this, no doubt.
Yeah,
Lee Lawson, she talked.
Hi, Robert.
Hey, bud. So Lee was amazing. Lee really helped me at the Northern Ireland Piping and Drumming School. She was very helpful with when I was a young solo player, she was always there to support me. And then the Hilders, the funny thing about the Hilders, great people. And my first foray into pipe bands on the West Coast was with the Robert Malcolm Memorial Grade 2 band, and David was pipe major. And it was back in 2001. And I came over as a 14 or 15-year-old. And I was for the Piping Hot Summer Drummer School. And he got chatting to me at the school. And it was Kathy McPherson, I believe, was the leading drummer there. And they said, look, in 2 weeks' time, we've got a competition. Would you like to compete? I was like, oh, let's see. So I learned a couple of MSRs and a medley. And then about 3 weeks later, headed over to Maxville for the first time in my life. And got to play at Maxville, which was quite an experience. But it was all thanks to David and Kathy, the leading drummer. They're making it happen. So it's small world how we can connect all these people into one conversation.
It's wild, man. Like, again, like I can't, we'd use up all the time allotted if I was purely talking about how great the Hilders are. And I have a lot of time for them. And again, talking about the banter and all that stuff, to be quite honest, you know, on the occasion that I am, you know, messaging back and forth with either, you know, Lee or Robert or David especially, and Shauna, like, I mean, I had a really great year with those guys, but quite honestly, I think the thing I miss the most is just the regular banter. I mean, honestly, that year I played in the band, I'm not even kidding, David and I would be chatting every day. And, you know, in a very short amount of time, those people became very dear friends of mine. And I really miss seeing them regularly, you know, and got a lot of time for them for sure.
Well, I think that's another message for people there, is that as a bass drummer in a band, you could look at that and be like, hey, it's lonely at the top, it's lonely in the middle, you're one person in the middle of the band. But I think it's really important to realize that the conversations and the connections that you have as a bass drummer with your pipe major, with your leading drummer, with your midsection, you know, you are the gel that connects everybody. So I think it's super important to keep the dialogue and the communication open. And certainly when I was leading the Canterbury Corps a few years back, I would always make sure to have a very close relationship with the bass drummer, but also make sure they got a lot of autonomy so that they can go and write their own music and add their own flair. And I think it's super important to have that two-way communication.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And again, going back to kind of what I said earlier, I understand that, there are some bands that don't necessarily have that, and that's okay. If that's what kind of works for those bands, I'm of the opinion, and it's just my opinion, but I am of the opinion that if you have the latter, and have a little bit of that freedom, or if bass drummers are allowed a bit more of that freedom, it makes huge dividends musically. And again, not necessarily quite so vanilla. And, it's, inject a little bit more life and a little bit more excitement. And you got to have that great communication. And it's just integral, to have that awesome
100%.
communication. Yeah.
And in terms of, I was thinking, because you've always created a really, really good sound with your drum, what would you recommend for people? First of all, what tools, before you start thinking about developing your ear set, what tool set would you recommend for people, some basic tools that you might use to help you set the drums up?
Well, I mean, obviously you have to work on technique. You have to work on feel. And, those two things, you can work on technique. You don't always have the feel, and that's kind of one of those things, I think, as musicians, that it's sometimes a bit of a bitter pill to swallow. But the fact is that just not everybody has that gift, and I think I really do feel that sometimes it's just that it factor that some people have, other people really have to work at it. So those are a couple of things. If you're fortunate enough to work on those things and develop those skills, great. When it comes to to gear and that kind of thing, you can definitely do a lot of things to help yourselves out. I used to be a little bit more, I used to hold my cards a little bit closer to my chest when it comes to this topic, but after, sitting out for a couple of seasons, it's good to share the information and spread the wealth. I know what gear I like. I've played pretty much everything. And I think you can get good sound out of pretty much any of the major brands these days, whether it be Premier or Andante or Pearl. And certainly now we've got new products, with all the axial stuff. I have yet to really hear them in person, the bass and tenors, that is. So the jury's still out a little bit for me with that. I can say that I've gotten great, and I don't mind saying that, I've gotten great sound consistently from the Pearl products. I just bought my own Pearl drum recently. I believe in them that much that I bought my own. And I got my good sound out of the Andantes when I was with Dowco as well. The thing I like about those two drums, particularly the Pearl drums, is that so much sound comes out of your shell. Obviously, that's a huge thing for me. So the first thing I look for is how well are the shells made, and what kind of wood? Can I get any customization to that, or can I do any customization myself? There's certain woods that are just going to have better tone. I've learned this, from my drumming experience playing drum kit as well. There's certain applications that you're just going to get better sound with certain types of wood, seeing as though we play outdoors, largely. For my money, you want to stick with the warmer sounding tones that you're going to get from maple and mahogany, things like that. And so far, unless you really have a sweet deal and you can really sweet talk the manufacturers and whatnot, most people for off the shelf, when it comes to most of those drums, you're pretty much relegated to birch. Birch is a great sounding wood, but you're still limiting yourself a little bit. That's one of the reasons why I really love the Pearl drum, is because it's maple. The off-the-shelf version is maple. Now, the ones we were playing with, the Frasers, were a little bit more customized. The last 2 sets of drums I played with them, they were mahogany shells, African mahogany, and they were beautiful. But also, one of the first things I do is I always, whenever I get a new drum, is I get the edges rounded out, the bearing edge. So I'll get my bearing edges recut to more of a rounded 45 as opposed to like a sharp 45. I'm looking at myself on the screen and trying to do this in make sense. But essentially like rounder versus sharper. And what that round edge is going to do is going to give you more head to shell contact, which is going to, of course, help the shell vibrate more. And it's basically going to give you more of that classic 60s, 50s, 60s Gretsch sound, which is, of course, what all the session guys in Nashville search for and whatnot, you know. So again, it's a little bit just like that drum science that I've taken from what I know about drum kits and taken it to pipe band stuff. And, you know, I've heard a lot of guys and girls get some really great sounds out of drums, but you know, I've always kind of preferred the sound I get, you know. And
that's it. And I think that should go out to everyone watching this. Go for a
Mm.
sound that you like. If you're playing your drum, make sure you set it up so you enjoy the sound. Don't set it up for a judge. You don't set it up for someone else. Make sure that you like.
You got to trust that. And again, a lot of it also comes down to the communication with your bandmates as well, your lead drummer or your pipe major. You know, where's the band pitched? You need to kind of do this kind of research too and know how to, and every drum is different. That's another thing too, is that you need to be willing to do the work, to roll your sleeves up and get a bit dirty, to understand your instrument and know where that sweet spot is, where you're going to get the best tone possible for that instrument to deal with the application that you need it for. So you got to, like, again, just like the practice thing, you got to do the work, not only woodshedding at home, learning the language and learning the rudiments and all that stuff. We also need to learn your instrument, and you need to learn how it's going to perform. And you know,
100%.
there's other things too, like, you know, mallets and mallet selection and stuff like that. You know, there's a lot of good products out there. I play 2 different types of mallets. I love the M&G mallets, and I also love the Twisted Thistle mallets that Mike Cole makes. You know, there's another guy who knows a little thing or two about sound, and so I've been lucky enough to kind of play both of those, and with some good results. And also I tend to use the Brow Fry harness, which Tyler Fry's dad makes, and he makes them custom for me, which are a little bit different than the off-the-shelf ones, but same basic idea. Yeah, I've been lucky that, you know, that gear has never done me wrong. Yeah.
Good. Well, thanks for sharing the gear, because a lot of people will want to know what you've used. And I was fortunate enough to sit down with Mike Cole a few weeks ago and talk to him about what he does. So I'll be, if it's not up already, guys, on the YouTube channel here, it will be up soon. I had a great interview around Twisted Thistle and his products. And talking about products, I like your t-shirt. That's very appropriate for us pipe banders and Highland dancers. 4-reel apparel. I love it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. A friend of my wife and I, also a former, well, I shouldn't say former, a Highland dancer. She still teaches and whatnot, but I think more or less retired from competition. But our friend Cindy Kamov, and she with another friend of hers run this company, and they make a lot of primarily dance-based kind of, you know, apparel, support apparel, swag, and that kind of thing. But, you know, they also do the odd little kind of pipe band friendly versions for you too. And so, yeah, check them out, and maybe you can put a link for them as well, because it's always nice to help out.
I'll pop a link
friends
below right after this.
Yeah, they make some really great gear, and she's been lucky, or she's been great to kind of, you know, every now and then my wife and I will get a package in the mail with some, you know, some stuff to wear around, and that's awesome.
Oh,
you know.
I can't complain about that. No, it looks really cool. I love the stuff.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, Johnny, I want to say a massive thank you for taking the time. You're truly one of the legends in my eyes in the pipe band world, and I know there's a lot of people would agree with me that you really walk the walk. And, you know, you call a spade a spade. You show us how you play through the way that you play. You're a very emotional player. It's incredible to watch. It's really an art form. So for those who haven't seen Johnny, please check out the links below. He's one of a kind. And he's also the kind of guy that I firmly believe if you want some advice, you want to reach out to and connect, go on to Facebook and connect with him, and you know, ask him the questions you want to ask, because he's all about helping this art form. So I just want to thank you for everything you've contributed and everything you're going to continue to contribute to this pipe band world.
Thanks a lot, James. Really, it's really been great chatting with you, and to be in such great company along with some of the other guys you've interviewed. So I'm very humbled, and thanks a lot. And it's been really great catching up with you.
Thanks a million, Bob. We'll talk soon.
All right.